We have just heard what I think is almost a horror story from two great senators, one representing 80 jobs, one representing maybe just dozens of jobs. But every one of those jobs matter in America. And we come here every week and we say, we're here fighting for the middle class. We're here fighting to build the American economy. We're here fighting to make sure that our businesses and our manufacturing is competitive in a highly charged and highly competitive world. And we have an institution that is critical to making sure that we have access to these export markets, doesn't cost the Treasury a dime, is used by large corporations and small corporations alike, and it is supported by Democrats, it is supported by Republicans, but why do we shut down the EXIM Bank? Well, I serve on the Banking Committee, and we had a hearing. The bill that we've been considering these many months is the Heitkamp bill, and I've taken responsibility for addressing some of the concerns of the EXIM Bank and looking at how we can reform some of the things that are legitimate concerns about how the bank operates. But I will tell you from that hearing, what you saw was the National Association of Manufacturers. You saw the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and you might imagine that those two witnesses were the Republican witnesses. They were not the Republican witnesses. They were the Democratic witnesses. The Republican witnesses came from intellectual think tanks. They came from institutions of higher learning with conservative think tanks, and they all had a theory about the EXIM Bank. And I asked them a simple question when it came time for me to ask a question. I asked every one of those persons who represented a think tank or represented an academic institution how many jobs they've created, what their output is, what their contribution to the gross domestic product was, what their contribution was to American jobs and building the American economy. They didn't have much of an answer. And I said, why should I believe what you're telling me in terms of this being the slippery slope towards the demise of democracy as we know it, which is really how the EXIM Bank has been categorized, against the word of the National Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers. This has become an irrational ideological fight. And unfortunately, we have irrational ideological fights almost daily in the United States Congress, to no good end for the American people. But I will tell you this one has devastating consequences. We now have shut down the bank, no new credits coming in, for 2.5 months. 2.5 months where a small manufacturer in Delaware may say, well, you know, how have we done this in the past? How have we taken on currency risk? How have we taken on debt risk? How have we guaranteed this in the past? Well, call up your local banker, and you know what your local banker is going to tell you? Call the EXIM Bank. Because in spite of what they tell you, that somehow, magically in this market, will emerge a private institution that will carry on the responsibility of the EXIM Bank, that's not reality. And the largest supporters of the EXIM Bank are those financial institutions that want to continue to provide credit and help grow those American businesses that are putting Americans to work. Now, one of the things that I did want to talk about today, because way too often we hear about the so-called Bank of Boeing, the Bank of GE, and how it is that this institution only helps those large manufacturers. Well, what I will tell you first off is if you look at the business model of GE or you look at the business model of Boeing, what they do is they assemble. They assemble things that are manufactured all across the country. And they're manufactured in large shops and small shops and all the way down that supply chain to small communities that are doing things in Jamestown, North Dakota, that are growing jobs, in the communities that you just heard here in Bangor, Maine, and the communities in Delaware, building out those jobs. Those are the people we are hearing from. Those are the people who are shaking their head saying, why is it that you guys talk all the time about helping American business, growing the economy, growing exports? You talk all the time about jobs and the need to bring back the innovation, and the thing you do is you curtail and limit my ability to grow and, quite frankly, my ability to survive. So how does that happen? And I want to talk about the equipment wholesalers that will see a negative impact. Look at this, 35 to 40% if XM isn't reauthorized. Equipment wholesalers stated that without the Export-Import Bank, it will be at a disadvantage in increasing globalized markets. No access. You know why? Because there's 80 other countries that have export credit agencies. And the first thing that China and India did when Asia slowed down, when they knew that their economies were beginning to suffer some of the consequences of slow growth, guess what they did? The first thing they did is they pumped more money into their export credit agencies. In fact, billions more into those export credit agencies. And then they shouted hip, hip, hooray when this institution shut down the XM Bank, because they knew not only did they have money to capitalize these and to guarantee these sales, but they were operating in a market where we have unilaterally economically disarmed in the export market. And so when we go back and we take a look at how much the U.S. Export-Import Bank has supported, more than 850,000 jobs. When you look at Wapton, North Dakota, Wapton, North Dakota is the largest town next to my hometown. Not a lot of people live there, but the people who work there, those jobs matter. And you look at that, almost $1 million, and those jobs are being threatened today because of the inactivity of this institution. 60% of Belting's annual sales revenues come from customers who are located outside the United States of America. This is a small town in Wapton, North Dakota. Many of the pages here probably didn't even know such place existed. But the people who work there are doing a great job, and they're contributing to the global economy, but more importantly, they're building out their local economy, and they're building out the United States manufacturing and trade deficit, which is something I know you, Mr. President, as a former head of OMB and somebody who's watched the American economy, is very concerned about, making sure that our trade deficit's favorable to us, that we're actually exporting more than what we're importing. That's how we grow our economy. That's called new wealth creation. And so when we look at not just manufacturing, but we look at JM Grain, a business that I visited, built out of nothing, just a mom and pop who put their heads together and said, this is something I think we can do, built this great business. The Export-Import Bank provides credit and credit insurance needed for JM Grain to export its products. If XM isn't reauthorized, JM Grain may be forced to sell its product to larger corporations that can finance exports. Consolidation. Because we can't take care of small business, even though the platitudes and all of the statements are quite to the contrary. On the floor of the United States Senate, in the floor of the Congress, is that we care about small business, but we do nothing in terms of our actions to really prove that. Amity Technology, it's a great, great story. This is a family, the developers of this company actually comes from the family that developed the Bobcat skid steer loaders. You can imagine that. And that company was sold and it has moved on, but yet those young entrepreneurs, those young inventors have taken the next step and taken the next step. This is a company that is absolutely dependent on the Export-Import Bank. And so if you look at this, it supported nearly 50 million in exports in the last decade, and without the Export-Import Bank, Amity would lose at least 10% of its business. They make sugar beet equipment. Story after story after story in America. This is just North Dakota, and we could tell you more stories about what's happening in North Dakota. But story after story after story in the state of North Dakota and across this country are small businessmen, small businesswomen who are shaking their heads saying, what did we do? Why is it that something like the Export-Import Bank, which is so critical to us being successful and doesn't cost you a dime, doesn't cost the American taxpayers a dime, why is it that this is so hard? And I have to try and explain how it is that we got 64 votes for the Export-Import Bank here on the floor of the Senate. a huge majority, and we think we actually have the support of about 67 members of the United States Senate. Veto-proof majority, if you look at it that way. And we know that over in the House of Representatives, there's well over 50% of the members of that body would vote for the EXIM Bank. So where's the hang-up? Where's the problem? Well, quite honestly, the problem is in leadership. Because if this isn't a priority, or if the EXIM Bank may be a problem for a speaker who has a small but vocal group of conservatives who hate the EXIM Bank that have made this their celebrity cause, then we'll just send it over here and we'll kind of try and sneak it in. That's kind of the idea, right? We need a vehicle. You know, I hear that so often for good ideas and for things that we know we have majority votes for, and well over majority votes for. We need a vehicle. I joke to my staff that I'm going to introduce a bill. It's going to be called the vehicle. And then we'll be able to do everything that we have to do to keep the American economy moving forward, the things that we can all agree on. Because then maybe the American public will see something that's not rancor and disagreement. They'll see us listening to American business, to American manufacturers, to American workers. And they'll hear that we actually will respond and we'll move this bill forward. Now, there's a lot of talk that we may not get this done in September. Doesn't look very good. And if you had told me when we shut down the bank in June, if you had told me that we weren't going to open it up in July, I said that's not likely. We'll get the bank reopened in July. July came and went, and the promise of the vehicle, which was supposed to be the transportation bill, never materialized. And the promise of putting it somewhere where we could actually get it done never materialized. And so we went home in August, and I said, well, you know, we'll get her done in September. We'll figure out a way to reauthorize the EXIM Bank in September because we can't shut it down for that long. September has come and gone. We've got other priorities, no opportunity for floor time. And now we're looking at October, and the promise once again in October is that we're going to put it on the transportation bill. Well, you know, I've heard that promise twice. And so I think it is now time to ask for consideration of this bill. And people say, we only reserve the special floor time of the United States Senate for really important ideas. And I said, the 80 people, 90 people in Bangor, Maine, they think this is a really important idea. And all the people who are looking now, who supply GM, GE, who are looking at GE's plan to move a lot of this manufacturing and assembly overseas, they think this is really, really important. And they think American jobs and American manufacturing and our trade deficit and our access to global markets, they think that's really an important thing for the United States Congress to consider. And so we have a bill, has broad bipartisan support, the Heitkamp Export-Import Reauthorization Bill. We can put that bill on the floor. We can move it in an expedited fashion because we have the procedure to do this. When there's a will, there's a way, trust me. We can move pretty quickly to votes here if we really want to. And we can pass this bill. And then we can send it over to the House of Representatives, and they can put it on the floor, and they can pass this bill, and it can get sent to the President's desk and get signed. And we can reopen the Export-Import Bank. We can hang out a big sign, open for business once again. But if the longer we wait, the longer we make it virtually continue to allow this to become the celebrity cause of a very, very small minority of hardcore conservatives in this country, the harder it is going to be to reauthorize the EXIM Bank. And at the end of the day, make no mistake, this isn't about inside the Beltway politics. It's not about whether we're going to have political winners and losers. What this is about is people's livelihood. It is about helping American workers do what we know we do best: innovate, create, manufacture, and export. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, thank you so much for the time. We will continue to be talking about the EXIM Bank. As you know, I almost can't even approach a group because they think I'm going to regale them with 20 hours of the EXIM Bank and the challenges that we have in reauthorization, but I will tell you this. The Ex-Im Bank is not only about manufacturing, it's almost a metaphor for what's wrong in the United States Congress. And what that is an institution that creates jobs, that has broad bipartisan support, that has the opportunity to provide opportunity to American workers, and we shut it down because the United States Congress can't figure out how not to let a minority of people dictate the agenda. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.